In As You Like It, everyone seems to be just hanging out a lot. I'm Dennis Jers. I'm teaching a Shakespeare course at Seton Hill University. And when I say people are hanging out, I don't mean that they're just standing there giving boring speeches. People wander by and sing. There's an adorkable meet cute. There's flirting. There's bad poetry and friend zoning. There's cross dressing and role playing. There's more singing, and we get wonderful lines like, I do desire we may be better strangers. And I am not a slut, though I thank the gods that I am foul. Though the word slut at this time roughly meant hot mess rather than promiscuous person. The characters do a lot of passing the time and telling stories and amusing each other as they come and go. And Shakespeare is laying on familiar tropes with a trowel. The leading lady, Rosalind, is one of Shakespeare's great parts. She is witty and she takes action. And Orlando is, well, his function is to be in love with the heroine, put it that way. In the plot, there's banishment and injustice and the ache of absence. But the bad guys in As You Like It don't get psychologically deep speeches about their motives and their moral justification. People smarter than I am date this play to a little before Twelfth Night and a little after Hamlet. All three of these plays feature duels, subterfuge, plot points that hinge on letters. That is the creative space that Shakespeare was in, and it was what audience responded to. And the original audiences would have known when they were seeing a tragedy, or, in this case, a comedy. Act 1, Scene 1 begins with the young gentleman Orlando conversing expositionally with his late father's former servant Adam about how his eldest brother Oliver has sent their middle brother Jaques away to school, but treats him, the youngest son, like a servant. Rough words escalate to physical threats, and our hero Orlando gets physical. We don't need any stage directions. It's right there in the dialogue. Orlando says, Wert thou not my brother, I would not take this hand from thy throat till this other hand had pulled out thy tongue for saying so. After some words from Adam, the old servant, Orlando backs off. And instead of being grateful for Adam's help, Oliver calls him old dog and then calls in my namesake, a character named Dennis, who I was so pleased to encounter when I read this play for the first time as a college freshman. And I still remember the disappointment when it turned out that Dennis has two lines and is one of the most boring named characters in Shakespeare. He exists simply in order to introduce a different minor character, the wrestler Charles, who repeats old news that old Duke Sr. has recently been banished by the new Duke Frederick, who's the younger brother. Rosalind is the daughter of the old banished Duke Sr. She has not herself been banished because she is close with her cousin Celia, the daughter of the usurping Duke Frederick, who is now in power. The banished Duke and his followers are off in the Forest of Arden, where more young men are gathering, and we are told living happily, we might say off the grid, like Robin Hood. Okay, you got all that backstory? The plot proper begins as Charles the wrestler warns Oliver that he's learned that the young Orlando plans to enter the upcoming wrestling match anonymously, presumably to win prize money? Check. Because he's feeling bored and impotent? Check. Because it's an excuse to get a wrestling match on the stage? Also check. This wrestler asks Oliver either to talk Orlando out of this ill-advised attempt or to excuse him for professionally breaking his challenger's ribs. And Oliver doesn't think about it at all. He just basically says, wrestle on, my dude. He's got a short soliloquy where he confesses he doesn't know why he hates his brother, And scene. Act 1, Scene 2 opens with Celia and Rosalind helpfully mentioning each other's names and also helpfully repeating their backstory in case we didn't catch whose father is in power and whose father is exiled. Rosalind is determined to be an amusing and loyal companion to her more fortunate cousin. The fool Touchstone arrives with word the Duke wants to see Celia, and then he launches immediately into a story about a knight who swears by his honor. And when Touchstone asks these women to swear by your beards that I'm a knave, at first it looks like he might be using this gendered figure of speech carelessly, like if I were to go up to a woman and say, "You the man." But Touchstone here is actually making the point that expecting a woman to swear by her beard is like trusting this knight who swears by his honor. It's something that they lack. Now, all this sounds like it's just witty wordplay, but Touchstone makes it political by saying this hypothetical knight without honor is one that old Frederick your father loves. Celia is still being playful, but she warns Touchstone that even this hint of questioning the Duke's judgment might get him whipped, and that establishes Frederick as a potential threat. Another random unimportant character who is not named Dennis, but instead somebody named LeBeau, enters with the message that Charles the Wrestler has just crushed the ribs of 3 brothers, one after the other. Yonder they lie, somewhere off stage, where we are told that their old father is weeping over them. Now note, these 3 brothers are not the 3 brothers Oliver, Jaques, and Orlando from Scene 1. This story of the strong literally crushing the weak reminds us, again, of the power hierarchy here in Duke Frederick's court. In this little dark moment about the suffering 3 brothers and the grieving old man, Rosalind leans in a little bit darkly. She references this broken music in his sides, which it could be a reference to splitting your sides laughing, or maybe it's the wheezing of the defeated wrestlers who are apparently dying just off stage. And Rosalind says she's all about seeing more rib breaking for sport. Just as her own father's banishment becomes an opportunity for her to be grateful to Celia's generosity, here she's treating this sad story about the man's 3 sons as an opportunity for some cynical puns. She's kind of giving quirky goth sidekick, not exactly main character energy here. The wrestling match conveniently happens to be scheduled for right here, where Rosalind and Celia are standing, wherever it is, the play doesn't specify. But a crowd and the competitors just swoop in, and Duke Frederick, seeing that this anonymous challenger is young and likely to be crushed by Charles, casually asks the lady, "Go try to talk this youth out of the attempt." And Celia tries, but she doesn't really offer any good reasons to get Orlando to quit. Rosalind rather cleverly suggests that they could ask the Duke to cancel the whole match, which would let Orlando save face. But Orlando says he doesn't really care if he dies. So the match begins, and Celia is in a sports mode. She's trash talking the guy she wants to lose. But Rosalind, by contrast, is quieter. She is focused on the young man she wants to win, which is a little different in their characters. And of course, win he does. Duke Frederick, however, is disappointed to learn this youth's father was another one of this usurping duke's enemies. But Rosalind gets excited because she recalls her own father loved Orlando's father. During their post-victory conversation, Orlando can't really say much, but when the women start to leave, Orlando does manage to beckon for Rosalind to return. And privately, before returning, Rosalind admits she can't afford to play hard to get, so she's going to, answer Orlando's gesture. But out loud, she tells Orlando, "You've wrestled well and overthrown more than your enemies," implying her heart. Okay, let's think about this, Orlando. You're glistening with sweat from this wrestling match that you just won. And this woman gives you a necklace. And when you gesture at her, she comes right back. And when she shows up, she makes a wrestling related flirty pun. Okay, dude, she is totally into you. Now is your chance. But the next person to speak is not Orlando replying to the flirty pun. It's Celia who says, "Will you go now, cuz?" Which is basically Celia reacting to the awkward silence by saying, "Oof." And we know there must be an awkward pause because a little later, Orlando says to himself, "What passion hangs these weights upon my tongue? I cannot speak to her." So we know that Orlando was awkward and didn't really make a good impression, but that Rosalind likes him. Then this random character, LeBeau, who gets far more lines than Dennis, and I'm really trying not to be bitter about that, returns to Infodump that Duke Frederick, who we just saw being disappointed but, cordial. Now the Duke is mad at both Orlando and Rosalind, and so LeBeau is warning them. Scene 3, Celia is being a little salty that Rosalind is pouting and not talking. And Rosalind reveals that she is daydreaming about her hypothetical future fam with Orlando. And what follows is this series of layered puns. Celia suggests Rosalind's, lovelorn woes are collecting like little burrs on her petticoats. And Rosalind says, "Well, I could shake burrs off my coat, but not off my heart." And Celia tells Rosalind to hem her heart. The way you would mend a snagged piece of clothing by sewing up the hem, you would hem it. But a hem here is a version of ahem, clearing your throat before you start speaking, and speaking is what Rosalind is not doing. Celia wants Rosalind to clear her throat and start speaking instead of brooding. And Rosalind immediately picks up on this ahem pun, and she adds her own layer. She'd clear her throat, and she'd start speaking if doing so would get her ahem, H-I-M. Okay, I will let you enjoy for yourself the further linguistic and romance and sport-related puns in this scene. But it's almost as if Shakespeare is aware that he's asking us to keep quite a lot of backstory in our heads. So a little bit further dialogue reminds us about Duke Ferdinand's banishing of Rosalind's father. And right on cue, Frederick. Duke Frederick banishing Rosalind's father. And right on cue, Frederick and his lords sweep on to wherever Rosalind and Celia are, this undefined space somewhere in Duke Frederick's orbit. And Duke Frederick has some bad news. And it's time for the women to flee. Celia suggests that she disguise herself with dirt and poor clothing to avoid notice. And together, they will go seek Rosalind's banished uncle in the forest of Arden. And Rosalind, being a Shakespeare heroine, ramps things up by noting that because she herself is more than common tall, as she puts it, she should dress up as a man. And she chooses the name Ganymede, who she describes as Jove's own page. I had to look him up. He was a human prince who was so handsome that he was abducted by the king of the gods to be a servant on Mount Olympus, which is not a bad gig, really. Shakespeare's original audience would have understood that Rosalind is playfully acknowledging her own displacement from the court and going to a place of possibility and potential that's very different from the court. I might as well pause here.